October 1944. The Pacific War has reached its critical turning point after 3 years of brutal, island-hopping campaigns. American forces stand at the doorstep of the Philippines. What's about to unfold in these waters will become the largest naval battle in human history, a clash involving nearly 200,000 men, hundreds of ships, and the fate of the entire Pacific War. This is the story of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, 4 days that would decide whether Japan could continue fighting or face inevitable defeat. General Douglas MacArthur had made a promise. When forced to evacuate the Philippines in 1942, he vowed, "I shall return." Now in October 1944, that promise was about to be fulfilled. But the Japanese Empire would not surrender the Philippines without a fight. These islands were the lifeline connecting Japan to its conquered territories in Southeast Asia, the oil, rubber, and resources, and that kept the Japanese war machine running. By 1944, Japan's strategic position had become desperate. The empire's survival depended on resources from conquered territories, oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, tin from Thailand. All these vital supplies had to pass through the Philippines. If the Americans retook these islands, they would sever Japan's lifeline. The Japanese High Command understood this perfectly. Lose the Philippines, lose the war. The American 3rd and 7th Fleets represented the most powerful naval force ever assembled. Admiral William Halsey commanded the 3rd Fleet with its fast carriers and new battleships. Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid led the 7th Fleet, the invasion support force. Together they brought over 200 warships and 1,000 aircraft. But the Japanese had a plan, a desperate, complex, all-or-nothing gamble called Operation Shogo. Operation Shogo was audacious in its complexity. The Japanese would split their remaining fleet into 3 forces. A northern force centered on aircraft carriers with few planes would lure Halsey's powerful 3rd Fleet away from the landing beaches. Meanwhile, 2 surface forces, Center Force and Southern Force, would thrust through separate straits and converge on Leyte Gulf, destroying the vulnerable American landing ships and troops. It was a plan born of desperation, but it almost worked. October 20th, 1944, A-Day. American forces stormed ashore at Leyte. Over 100,000 troops landed with surprisingly light resistance. General MacArthur waded ashore that afternoon, microphones recording his famous words, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." But while MacArthur made history on the beach, the greatest naval battle ever fought was about to begin in the surrounding waters. Admiral Takeo Kurita commanded the Japanese Center Force, the most powerful surface fleet Japan could still muster. At its heart was Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, along with her sister ship Musashi. These floating fortresses carried 18-inch guns that could fire shells weighing more than a small car. Accompanied by 3 other battleships, 10 heavy cruisers, and numerous destroyers, Kurita's force began its approach through the Cebuan Sea, heading for San Bernardino Strait. The Japanese hadn't gone unnoticed. Before dawn on October 23rd, 2 American submarines, USS Data and USS Dase, detected Kurita's center force in the Palawan Passage. The submarines moved into attack position. At 5:30 a.m., both subs fired spreads of torpedoes. The results were devastating. Heavy cruiser Atago, Kurita's flagship, exploded and sank. Heavy cruiser Maya broke apart and went down. Heavy cruiser Takao was crippled and forced to withdraw. In minutes, Kurita had lost 3 major warships and found himself swimming for his life. Admiral Kurita was pulled from the water and transferred to the battleship Yamato. Soaking wet, having lost his flagship, he faced a crucial decision: press on or withdraw. Despite the losses, Kurita ordered his force to continue. The plan depended on coordination and timing. He had to push through to Leyte Gulf, but the Americans now knew he was coming, and they were preparing a reception. October 24th dawned clear. Admiral Halsey's carriers had located Kurita's center force in the Cebuan Sea. Wave after wave of American aircraft took off Hellcat fighters, Helldiver dive bombers, and Avenger torpedo bombers. Over 250 aircraft would strike Kurita's ships throughout the day. The Japanese fleet steamed on, every gun firing at the swarms of American planes. The battle for the Cebuan Sea had begun. The super battleship Musashi became the primary target. First one bomb, then another. Torpedoes slammed into her port side. Still she sailed on, her massive armour absorbing punishment that would have sunk any other ship. Second wave. More torpedoes, more bombs. Third wave, fourth wave. 5 waves in total struck throughout the day. Musashi absorbed an incredible 19 torpedo hits and 17 bombs. No ship in history had ever endured such punishment. But even the mighty Musashi had limits. By late afternoon the giant was listing heavily. Her bow submerged, water flooding through countless ruptures in her hull. At 7:35 p.m., Musashi capsized and sank, taking over 1,000 men with her. The Americans celebrated they had sunk one of Japan's super battleships. Surely, they thought, Kurita's battered force would turn back, but reports reaching Halsey's flagship suggested otherwise. The Japanese were withdrawing. Or were they? While Kurita fought for survival in the Cebuan Sea, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force was steaming south from Japan. His 4 carriers, Zukaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, had a crucial mission: be seen. These carriers were nearly empty. Japan had few trained pilots left. Ozawa's job was to sacrifice his ships to draw Halsey away from Leyte Gulf. All day October 24th, Ozawa tried to be detected, even launching his few aircraft on attacks to attract attention. Finally, late in the afternoon of October 24th, American scout planes spotted Ozawa's carriers to the north. The reports reached Halsey on his flagship New Jersey. Here was the Japanese carrier force, the same type of force that had struck Pearl Harbor. To a carrier admiral like Halsey, these were the primary targets. The battleships to the west seemed to be retreating. The decision seemed clear: go north, destroy the Japanese carriers, win a decisive victory. Admiral Halsey made his fateful decision. Third Fleet would go north in full force to destroy Ozawa's carriers. He took everything, all his fast carriers, all his modern battleships, all his cruisers and destroyers. Critically, Halsey believed Kurita's center force was too badly damaged to be a threat. He didn't leave a single ship to guard San Bernardino Strait. The northern exit from the Cebuan Sea lay wide open. The Japanese decoy had worked perfectly. While Halsey charged north, the Japanese southern force under Admiral Shoji Nishimura approached from the south through Surigao Strait. This force included 2 old battleships, Yamashiro and Fuso, along with 1 heavy cruiser and 4 destroyers. Nishimura didn't know he was steaming into a trap. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had positioned 6 American battleships across the northern exit of the strait. It was every naval officer's dream: crossing the T, positioning your battle line perpendicular to the enemy, allowing all guns to bear, while the enemy could only fire their forward turrets. The night of October 24th, 25 was dark and moonless. At 10:30 p.m., American PT boats made first contact. racing in to launch torpedoes at the Japanese column. They missed, but they alerted the Japanese that they'd been detected. Then destroyers moved in from both flanks, launching devastating torpedo attacks. Battleship Fuso, hit by multiple torpedoes, broke apart and sank. The heavy cruiser Mogami was crippled. Destroyers exploded and sank. Still, Nishimura pressed on with his flagship Yamashiro and remaining destroyers. At 3:51 a.m., Admiral Oldendorf gave the order, "Open fire." 6 American battleships erupted in flame. Salvos of 14-inch and 16-inch shells screamed toward the Japanese. Incredibly, 5 of the 6 American battleships were veterans of Pearl Harbor, Pennsylvania, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and West Virginia. They'd been raised from the mud and now exacted revenge. Radar-directed gunfire bracketed the Japanese ships. Yamashiro staggered under the avalanche of shells, ablaze from stem to stern. Admiral Nishimura's flagship. Yamashiro absorbed hit after hit. Fires raged throughout the ship. The bridge was a shambles. At 4:19 a.m., Yamashiro capsized and sank, taking Nishimura and most of his crew to the bottom of Surigao Strait. The southern force had been annihilated. Of the 7 Japanese warships that entered the strait, only the damaged cruiser Mogami and 1 destroyer escaped. It was the last time in history that battleships would fight battleships in a traditional gun duel. October 25th, dawn. While the Americans celebrated their victory at Surigao Strait, Admiral Kurita's center force was emerging from San Bernardino Strait. Kurita had reversed course during the night and now burst into the Philippine Sea. Halsey's entire fleet was 300 miles to the north, chasing Ozawa's carriers. San Bernardino Strait was unguarded. Between Kurita's 4 battleships and 10 heavy cruisers stood only one thing: Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was a unit of escort carriers, small, slow aircraft carriers built on merchant ship hulls. They'd been launched to support the Leyte landings, not to fight battleships. Admiral Clifton Sprague commanded 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. His mission was ground support and anti-submarine patrol. His carriers topped out at 18 knots. Kurita's battleships could make 27 knots. Sprague's ships carried aircraft for supporting troops, not sinking battleships. And now on the horizon came the most powerful surface force in the Japanese Navy. At 6:45 a.m., lookouts on Taffy 3's ships spotted pagoda masts on the horizon. Then came coloured splashes in the water around them, red, purple, green, yellow, different dyes mixed with shells so Japanese ships could spot their fall of shot. These were 18-inch shells from Yamato. Clifton Sprague couldn't believe it. That's not the Third Fleet. Those are Japs. The impossible was happening. The world's most powerful battleship force was bearing down on the most vulnerable American ships in the Pacific. Admiral Sprague ordered his carriers to run east, launching every aircraft they had. He laid smoke to hide his ships. Then he did something extraordinary. He ordered his destroyers to attack. Commander Ernest Evans of the destroyer USS Johnston didn't wait for orders. He charged directly at the Japanese fleet alone. His 2 000-ton destroyer against battleships 10 times his size. A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. They are 15 miles away and headed in our direction. They are believed to have 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and a number of destroyers. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds. We will do what damage we can. Johnston raced to 9,000 yards point-blank range for battleship guns and launched 10 torpedoes. Shells straddled the little destroyer. A 14-inch shell struck her bridge, killing several men. A 6-inch shell hit her engine room, cutting her speed, but Johnston's torpedoes ran true. One slammed into the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off her bow and knocking her out of the battle. Johnston then turned to make smoke, shells falling around her like waterspouts. Two more destroyers, Howell and Heermann, joined the attack, charging into the forest of shellfire. The escort carriers ran for their lives, their flight decks launching planes armed with whatever was available: bombs, torpedoes, depth charges, even just machine guns. Pilots made strafing runs on Japanese battleships, firing their .50 caliber guns at armoured behemoths, anything to distract and slow the enemy. Shells fell around the carriers. Gambier Bay took hits, slowing, falling behind. The Japanese were closing in. It seemed impossible that any American ship would survive. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, a ship even smaller than a destroyer, joined the attack. Her captain, Robert Copeland, told his crew, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds, from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." Samuel B. Roberts charged the Japanese line, firing over 600 shells and launching her torpedoes. She duelled with heavy cruisers at impossible odds. Her crew fired so fast and so long that her guns' barrels wore out and she had to reduce propellant charges to keep firing. The chaos of battle worked in the Americans' favour. Smoke obscured the action. Japanese ships, lacking coordinated fire control, sometimes shot at each other in the confusion. American destroyers darted in and out of smoke banks, launching torpedoes that forced Japanese battleships to turn away, losing precious time. The aggressive American attacks convinced Kurita he faced a much more powerful force. He thought he'd stumbled into Halsey's Third Fleet carriers, not vulnerable escort carriers. But courage couldn't stop shells forever. Gambier Bay, riddled with hits from heavy cruisers, capsized and sank at 9:07 a.m., the first and only American carrier sunk by surface gunfire in World War II. Destroyer Howell, torn apart by battleship fire, went down. Johnston, shot to pieces, her crew fighting to the last, sank at 9:45 a.m. Commander Evans went down with his ship. He would posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. Samuel B. Roberts, her hull ripped open by heavy shells, sank at 10:05 a.m. The little ships had paid a terrible price. But they'd bought time and inflicted damage. American planes swarmed over the Japanese fleet, scoring hit after hit. Heavy cruisers, Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya were crippled and would later sink. The heavy cruiser Tone was badly damaged. At 9:11 a.m., with victory in his grasp, Admiral Kurita did the unthinkable. He ordered his fleet to break off the attack and withdraw. The escort carriers and their few remaining defenders were saved. Kurita feared he'd taken too much damage, that Halsey's carriers would soon return, that the battle was turning against him. He didn't know how close he'd come to destroying the landing force at Leyte Gulf. 300 miles to the north, Admiral Halsey had found his prey. Ozawa's carrier force steamed in full view, practically inviting attack. At dawn on October 25th, American carrier planes launched in massive strikes. Ozawa's 4 carriers had only about 30 aircraft total between them, barely enough for self-defense. The northern force was exactly what it was supposed to be, a sacrifice. And now the sacrifice would be consummated. Wave after wave of American aircraft struck Ozawa's carriers. The light carrier Chitose sank under the first wave. Carrier Chiyoda was crippled and left dead in the water. The carrier Zuiho was hit repeatedly. And then came Zuikaku, the last surviving carrier of the Pearl Harbor strike force. For 3 years, Zuikaku had been a thorn in America's side, fighting at Coral Sea, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz. Now American bombers delivered her death blow. Bombs and torpedoes struck home. Zukaku listed, rolled over, and sank, her battle flag still flying. But while Halsey's pilots struck Ozawa's carriers, desperate messages reached his flagship from the south. Fast battleships are firing on escort carriers. Situation critical. The blood must have drained from Halsey's face. He'd left San Bernardino Strait unguarded. Kurita had gotten through. The landing force was in mortal danger. Even worse, at 10 a.m. came a message from Admiral Nimitz himself in Hawaii, asking in barely concealed anger, "Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders. Nimitz's communication staff had added padding phrases to confuse Japanese codebreakers, but to Halsey, those words stung like a slap. Halsey turned his battleship south at flank speed, racing toward Leyte Gulf, but it was 300 miles away. By the time his ships could arrive, the battle would be over, one way or another. Halsey's carrier planes continued to pummel Ozawa's force, sinking 3 more carriers and destroying the light cruiser Tama. Ozawa's sacrifice was complete, his carriers destroyed, and Halsey's main force pulled away from Leyte, but the northern force had accomplished its mission just barely too well. October 25th brought another terror to the Battle of Leyte Gulf. For the first time in organized fashion, Japanese kamikaze aircraft struck American ships. The escort carrier St. Lo had survived the surface battle off Sama, only to face a new threat from the sky. At 10:51 a.m., a Zero fighter, its pilot committed to death, crashed through St. Lo's flight deck. The aircraft's bomb detonated in the hangar bay, triggering massive explosions among fueled and armed aircraft. Within minutes, St. Lo was a blazing wreck. At 11:25 a.m., St. Lo rolled over and sank, the first major warship sunk by a kamikaze attack. Other escort carriers were hit, Santi, Suwannee, White Plains damaged but surviving. The kamikaze threat had announced itself with deadly effectiveness. Over the coming months, these suicide attacks would sink dozens of ships and damage hundreds more. A weapon born of desperation, the kamikazes revealed just how far Japan would go to resist defeat, but they couldn't change the outcome at Leyte Gulf. When the guns finally fell silent on October the 26th, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was over. 4 separate engagements across 3 days and hundreds of miles of ocean. It remains the largest naval battle in history. Over 200,000 men participated. Nearly 300 ships were involved. The statistics are staggering. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships including the mighty Musashi, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers, 28 major warships in total. Over 10,000 Japanese sailors died. The Imperial Japanese Navy, as an effective fighting force, ceased to exist. American losses, while significant, paled in comparison. 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escorts 6 ships. About 3,000 men killed and wounded. The American fleet remained overwhelmingly powerful. Most critically, the landing at Leyte was secure. MacArthur's forces would conquer the Philippines over the coming months, severing Japan's connection to its southern resources. The battle had decided the war in the Pacific, though fighting would continue for nearly another year. Heroes emerged from the battle. Commander Ernest Evans of the Johnston received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his destroyer's courageous charge against impossible odds. So did Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland of the Samuel B. Roberts and Commander Leon S. Kintberger of the Hoel. Admiral Clifton Sprague's desperate defence earned him the Navy Cross. These men and their crews had faced annihilation and fought back with everything they had. Their courage, under fire, became legend in naval history. The Battle of Leyte Gulf demonstrated both the best and worst of human nature. incredible bravery alongside calculated sacrifice. Tactical brilliance next to catastrophic decisions. Young men barely out of their teens operating complex machines of war with skill and courage that veterans twice their age would admire. On both sides, sailors fought with determination and honour. The battle validated the aircraft carrier as the new capital ship of naval warfare, rendering the battleship obsolete. It showcased the importance of intelligence, radar, and air power. Today the waters around Leyte Gulf are peaceful. Fishermen ply the same seas where great fleets once clashed. The wrecks of Musashi, Johnston, and dozens of other ships lie on the ocean floor, silent monuments to those who fought and died. The Battle of Leyte Gulf stands as the culmination of naval warfare as it had been practiced for centuries and simultaneously marked its transformation into something new. Never again would battleships duel. Never again would surface fleets of such magnitude meet in combat. It was the last great naval battle of the old era and the first great naval battle of the new.